What do you think about the Season of Discovery influencing the class design in retail? It's really interesting, isn't it? And it's something that people are talking about a lot. And I guess where I'd like to start on this subject, because it's something that I definitely want to speak about, is I want to hear your opinions on this. Now, I have obviously been following Season of Discovery from the outside, so I know what we're talking about when we're talking about like the runes and stuff and how they affect class design and how that must feel. And I'm hearing a lot of people talk about it and things like that. But I'm not playing Season of Discovery because even though it sounds great, Classic just doesn't really appeal to me in that way. So and even if I was playing it, I'd still want to hear all your opinions on it. So, I feel like the way it feels from the outside is this. Classic season structure, even though they're both called seasons, is very, very different from retail WoW's season structure. Classic season structure is very much more like Diablo 3 or Diablo 4's season structure, whereby the expectation is that to take advantage of whatever is happening in that season, you would start a new character. So in that sense, you'd never have the same thing in retail because no one would want that. You'd never get a season where the expectation was to start a new character. Or would you? Would that be something that you were interested in retail? Would you, if like there was a new season structure in retail where it was like, yeah, let's create an expectation where you create a new character for this season and you level them up and there's a fun thing that you can do while you're leveling them up. Would people be up for that or not? I would literally I was expecting more of you, because so many of you enjoying Season of Discovery, I was expecting way more of you to say that you would actually be up for that in retail. And I'm a little bit surprised. I'm a little bit surprised to see you say that you're not. I would, or like genuinely, I wouldn't mind an opportunity or an excuse, I should say, a specific excuse to start a new alt. I can actually quite enjoy. I could be quite into that, honestly. But I'm surprised that a lot of you are saying you would hate that, and it feels like in my chat right now the opinions are pretty vehemently against that. It's never something that really appealed to me in Diablo 3, the idea of starting a new character every time, and it always surprised me that people were so into it. Honestly, I think it's noticeable how Diablo 4 does seem to have killed that. Genuinely, like that attitude that people took over from Diablo 3 of, oh, it's a new season, start a new character, do the new thing, something that people just did naturally in Diablo 3. Diablo 4 has murdered that. People hate that idea now, and it's all Diablo 4's fault. So yeah, 68% of you are saying no, you don't want that at all in retail WoW. So in that case, what lessons would you take from Season of Discovery and apply to retail WoW? Just spitballing here. What concepts would you take and would you apply? Because Season of Discovery is noticeable. Like, the thing that strikes me about Season of Discovery is it feels from the outside, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels from the outside that it's probably got less impact on how different it makes the game than hardcore does. I feel like hardcore is more transformative as a gameplay experience than Season of Discovery. And Season of Discovery is very much just a season. It'll change. It's not a Classic Plus now. So time-gated leveling, most gratuitous. Is that something people agree with? Would people be into time-gated leveling? You'd have to start. So here's the thing, right? If you're not into fresh start servers where you're just leveling a character from scratch for the sake of it, then if you want time-gated leveling, that has to be a new expansion feature. That has to start at 70. And it'll have to stop you at like 75, and then 75 to 80 later on, or something like that. Unsurprisingly, lots of you don't want it. I've always thought that would be a good idea. I've always thought, I've always said, I often thought that introducing new levels with a new season You know, so you, instead of doing all of your leveling right at the very beginning of the expansion, you level maybe 5 or 10 levels, and then you get an extra 5 or 10 levels in like season 2 or something like that. You know, just to kind of like really make the questing feel meaningful at the beginning of the new season, and to I don't know, I always thought, you know, leveling is one of my favorite parts of expansion, and why not add a bit of leveling in the middle of an expansion? You know, I've always said that, and whenever I've said it, I've never said like this would make the game better. I've always said it might be fun to do that as an experiment, one expansion. And whenever I've said it, people have shot me down in flames. I have been crucified by my own chat every time I've mentioned it. And now Season of Discovery comes along, and it's got more of you thinking, hey, maybe that could be a good idea. Not most of you, obviously, though, by any means. Okay, so time getting leveling, better leveling experience. Well, I think we all want a better leveling experience, but you know, what is better about Season of Discovery's leveling experience to retails? Because like just saying it's better isn't much help really. The class combo. Okay, so we're just talking about more, and this is actually more variable class designs, warlock tanking, more involved leveling. That's classic in general, isn't it? Expansion of class roles. Okay, so this seems to be like the most common answer. More variety in class roles and things like that. It feels more customizable. Here's a question I've got for you, right? It feels more customizable because there's a whole bunch of new options, which are very different from, and I don't know the answer to this. I'm genuinely asking. I'm not being a dick. A lot of people say it feels a lot more customizable because of, you know, all the kind of the runes and things like that. My question to you is it actually more customizable, or are the same kind of meta builds and stuff there? It's just people are still working them out. You know, does it just feel more customizable because it's newer and people haven't like completely solved it yet? Or does it feel more, or is it actually more customizable? Because, you know, from what I'm seeing, if you want to do a warlock tank, I mean, there is a warlock tank build. You know, there's not like actually kind of loads and loads of variety in what you can always do. You can change your runes based on boss and party composition. Sure, but isn't that just like talents then? Isn't that basically just what more modern kind of talents and stuff are, though? Except not so customizable, because to change like your actual talent tree, you still have to go and properly respec. Like, is it actually more variable? You know, do you actually have more variety and options to switch out your build than you do in retail? I'm genuinely asking, but looking from the outside, it doesn't seem to me like there is. Like, there's the thrill of the new in the whole warlock tanking thing, and I like the idea that you have to go out and find and earn these runes. I think that's awesome. I think that's genuinely great. But when we've seen that with the Heart of Azeroth in BFA, people hated that you had to go out and earn the customizations in the Heart of Azeroth. But it looks to me like it's less customizable than retail. But like I say, it's your opinions that matter here. Sod is dumbed down as right powers. Well, I don't know about dumbed down, but yeah. So I think like the thrill of the variety at the moment does seem to be coming from warlock tanks and shaman tanks and rogue tanks and things like that. And I think that's great, and I think that's really, really fun. But part of that fun must come, I guess, from the temporary nature of it. The idea that once Season of Discovery is over, you know, that won't be a thing anymore. If they suddenly just went in retail, yo, warlock tanks, yo, shaman tanks, yo, rogue tanks, it would be cool and people would be really excited. But the thing that like adds to that excitement, I feel, is the fact that it's a seasonal thing, right? And I do like that you didn't know how to get these runes. I do like that you have had to discover, and I like that basically if ever the secret finding Discord has to get involved, that's a thumbs up from me. You know, if anything happens in game that makes the secret finding Discord rub their hands together and be like, yo boys, we got this, chill out. That is a massive dub for me. The more we have to use the secret finding Discord, the better. Warlock stuff isn't live retail talents. That's one example where this is wrong. Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. So they're not recreations of. A lot of the runes are kind of abilities that kind of come later in the WoW timeline for those classes, but obviously Warlock tanking isn't, stuff like that. So even though Metamorphosis was a Warlock thing, the tanking thing, like, it is very much designed to be a tank, and that's new and that's interesting and that's great. But I mean, I feel like is that a lesson that that retail could learn from Season of Discovery? Warlock tanks. I'm not sure that's like a lesson in itself, you know? Where, you know, like, yeah, you could easily do that, but would that really be as fun in retail as it is in Season of Discovery? I suspect not, even though I'm sure we'd all be down for it. I would be. But I suspect, like, the actual, like, that feeling of excitement is something more than, oh, they've just made a good change, which is what Warlock tanks would be in retail. You know, that excitement is coming from somewhere else. If you introduce Warlock tanks in retail, you would get satisfaction and you would get player contentment and happiness, but I'm not sure you get the same level of excitement as you do in Season of Discovery. And so that excitement is coming from somewhere else. Am I like making any sense? Don't paladins and priests share the same aesthetic? Why can't warlocks and demon hunters? Yeah, no reason why not. I like warlock tanks would be great, and I think shaman tanks would be great. Shaman tanks is the obvious one, you know, because they're a thing that actually did exist in WoW before, and I think that's just a really obvious thing. My theory is it's just a sneaky PTR for hero talents. So I've seen the comparison between Season of Discovery and hero talents quite a lot, and I mean, hero talents. I feel like people still haven't quite got their heads around what hero talents are going to be yet. So, you know, I feel like Season of Discovery runes are far more like the Heart of Azeroth than hero talents. I feel like hero talents, like, by the time you've leveled to max level in the War Within, you will have access to all of your hero talents. Most hero talent trees will utilize all of the hero talent tree. You know, there's gonna be like maybe 2 or 3 choices, which are like, it's more like, honestly, hero talents are more like dragon riding trees. You know, you are expected to have them all. So it's like if you had 2 different dragon riding trees, one of which like just makes your vigor last longer, and one of which makes you go faster. And so what you're essentially doing is you're choosing between, do I want my vigor to last longer, or do I want to go faster? So like if I'm going across the map, I'm going to want my vigor to last longer. If I'm just going like doing world quests and I have little gaps in between, I'm going to want my dragon riding to just be faster. You know, that's the choice you're making. You're like, with warrior, you're like, do I want my thunderclap to be more powerful, or do I want my like ignore pain or whatever to be more powerful? Like, that's the choice you're making, and that's essentially what each hero talent tree does. You're not making that many choices within the hero talent tree. They're not something you really have to unlock. They're all unlocked by the time you get to max level. And yeah, they are focused around one ability. Each one generally is our understanding of it. Whereas, and you know, from what I learned and what I've seen in other interviews and stuff, there's not really a desire on Blizzard's part at the moment, although obviously this could change, but it doesn't seem to be a desire on Blizzard's part at the moment to have hero talent trees really impact the role that, or mix up, I should say, the role that a class or a spec performs. You know, I was like, surely talent trees are going to be a perfect opportunity to kind of like lean some other specs into an augmentation style support role. And, you know, I was told in the interview that we did, and I've seen it in other interviews as well, where they're like, we're not really going to do that, no. So yeah, whereas like the idea with the runes in Season of Discovery is that very much they change what the role does a lot of the time, or change what role the spec performs, or the entire point of the spec, right? That's not what I think hero talents is going to do. So I can see why people are comparing them, but I do think they're pretty different. Honestly, I think the runes in Season of Discovery are more like the Heart of Azeroth. Certainly in the way that the runes are required, yeah. You must find the runes. I disagree with all these assumptions that retail and classic are that influential on each other. And I have to say, the influence retail has over classic is greater, in my opinion, than the other way around. Well, we've had devs, including Ian, flat out come out and say that the response to classic and stuff has impacted the way they look at designing retail and stuff like that. So, I mean, I'm happy to take them at their word. Katie UK, thank you for the 4 months. Thank you. In fact, if I do have a fear about the amount of new stuff seemingly coming to classic and the amount of innovation and stuff happening in classic, if I have a fear about it, which I don't really, but if I do have a single fear about it, then it's like the more kind of separate they become, the less chance I think there is that retail will actually be influenced by classic. I think generally retail being influenced by classic is a good thing. And the more classic becomes its own creative endeavor, the less chance I think there is that retail, takes elements of classic. And the more chance I think there is that it's like, well, we've got these two different games. We do more classic-y stuff in classic and we do more retail-y stuff in retail. And I would like to see less differentiation. I'd like them to be like, well, this stuff works in classic, so we should use it in retail, And I kind of, my one fear is that the more of a creative, like a separate creative endeavor that classic becomes, the less chance there is of that happening. Does that make sense? It's probably a pretty unfounded fear, honestly. But so, okay. So class variation. I feel, looking from the outside, that there's less class variation, honestly, in Season of Discovery than there is in WoW retail. But some of you probably disagree with that. I feel like at the moment it feels like there's a lot of variety because people still haven't worked it out, but give it a couple of seasons. And that's another reason why keeping leveling time gated is a really good idea, is because people can't work out everything at once. They can get this first kind of 25 levels down pat and meta the shit out of it, because that's what classic players do, man. I heard someone say online the other day on Twitter that they thought classic was less meta orientated than retail, and I see where they're coming from, but in my opinion that's not correct. I feel like classic has been meta since the day it released, and meta as fuck. If I go into classic right now, if I started a new character, if I started retail from scratch and I started classic from scratch right now, I could catch up in classic. I could catch up in retail 100 times faster than I could catch up in classic, to the majority of other people playing that game. Because in classic, it's it's meted to within an inch of its life, and has been for about 15 years. And that's the point, right? And I think that's a perfectly valid thing to enjoy about it, honestly. Me saying that is not saying meta is bad. There's massive enjoyment to be found from meta. That's basically where the enjoyment for any kind of build-based game comes from, is finding new, insane, combinations and builds and stuff. Diablo 3 did that beautifully. Diablo 4 can sometimes do it pretty well as well. And there's something really good to be said about that. I think people use meta as a bad thing, and I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think there's great enjoyment to be had from being meta. The problem comes when you're a toxic wanker about it. Dan Olsen did say that in his Why It's Rude to Suck at Warcraft video. Yeah, the argument being we're saying that kind of conditioned play means that we have created all these tools and things to create a meta and to know the meta and to abide by the meta, but that's not, let's understand, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a huge, and I think a lot of the enjoyment from WoW comes from being min-maxing and better and meta and things like that. There's got to be an element of all the other stuff as well. Mythic Plus meta is ruinous, but I see what you mean. So yeah, that's when you're imposing meta on other people, and that's when it becomes toxic and bad, right? So the problem with Mythic Plus is not that, there is a meta. The problem with Mythic Plus is that meta is applied by people who really shouldn't be bothering to apply it. The problem with the meta is people are applying that on 18s and pugs and being like, well, I saw that, Havoc is trash or whatever, so I'm not taking this 3K rated Havoc into this fucking dungeon with us. No way. Fuck that guy. You know, the problem with the meta in Mythic Plus, and this does apply to Raid, but not so much because, is that it's applied by people that just don't need to be applying it. The problem with the Mythic Plus meta is people watching streams of 27s and assuming they need to do the same thing. Yeah, exactly. 100%. And that wouldn't even be a massive problem if there wasn't also a big dollop of toxicity that goes with it as well, But I think the meta exists to a far greater degree in Classic. And people's abidement, that's a new word that I've just invented. People's abidement by the meta in Classic is because it's so much more firmly established, and people talking about discovery and the feeling of exploration and discovery in Classic is something that I get when I play the game. I completely understand it, I think it's fantastic. But again, a huge proportion of players that play Classic, when they level a character, they're literally using an add-on that tells them what quests to go and get next and where to go to get it and to lead them through the most efficient leveling path. Like, much more that happens in Classic, way more than it happens in retail. People are squeezing any exploration or discovery out of that game for the sake of efficiency, because that efficiency is there to be had in a way that it's not in retail. I do think it's possible to have a really brilliant exploratory and discovery type experience in Classic, but I don't think that's what a huge proportion of the players, certainly not the most serious players, are doing. And I think as a proportion of the player base, certainly long term, the serious players make up a much larger proportion of the Classic player base than they do the retail player base. Long term, obviously when a Classic expansion launches and stuff, I think you actually get way more casual players coming into the game than you ever get in retail, even for an expansion release. But I think, the players that are Classic's bread and butter, the players that keep their subs, the players that are there, 5 months into an expansion or what have you, there's a huge proportion of those, a much bigger proportion of those are power players, are min-maxers, are meta players than you would find in retail at the equivalent time frame. Remember how power gamers play don't represent how most other people play. No, they don't, but I think they make up a larger proportion of the player base in Classic than they do in retail. And that's my point, And I think anyone that's spent any time in Classic can understand that, honestly, and can appreciate what I'm saying there. But yeah, obviously meta exists in retail as well, and I think meta can be really fun. I think meta is a good thing, It's just as long as it doesn't bleed out, and I think WoW balance has generally been pretty good. Sorry, I disagree. You must not have watched veteran Classic players trying SOD and going around finding stuff for fun. Yoslo, I'm obviously not talking about Season of Discovery. Obviously I'm talking about the Classic that people know. Season of Discovery, yeah, you're correct. By its very definition is new stuff that people haven't worked out yet, which is why I think people are saying that it's got more class variety and customization than retail has, is because they don't know what the meta builds are necessarily yet, although people have a pretty good idea actually. Obviously I'm using Season of Discovery as a contrast to that. Obviously people don't no one's made the add-on that leads you through Season of Discovery leveling yet and takes you to all of the where all the runes and stuff are. Also, not all SOD players are Classic players. I mean, by definition they are, sorry. If you're playing Season of Discovery, I hate to tell you this, but you are in fact a Classic player because you're playing Classic. I mean, don't be ashamed. That's awesome. That's absolutely fine. That's why Season of Discovery is so great. But, and that's another reason why I think the temporary nature, the seasonal nature of Season of Discovery, the fact that it won't always be there, is probably the most important part of Season of Discovery, you know? Because otherwise it's just an expansion, you know, where you could learn it and you could make your leveling add-on and you could work out all the metas that you're aiming for from day one. But because Season of Discovery is temporary, because it will be up and then it will be gone, just like Season of Mastery, that adds to like the transient nature of the Warlock tank, of the Shaman tank. Is part of the excitement and part of the feeling of discovery. Because if it wasn't transient, if it was just a permanent change to the game, yeah, we'd just all learn it and we'd all know the meta, and like within a few weeks there would be no discovery. You know, because it would fall into that efficient meta that Classic is in generally. So I feel like a huge part of Season of Discovery's appeal and enjoyment comes from its transient nature. And I feel like, how do you apply that to WoW retail without having, you know, without the expectation that you're going to level a character from scratch to take part? I don't know. I think they'll put Warlock tanks in retail. Yeah. And here's the thing, Persona. What I'm saying is, if they did that, it would be a permanent change. So like, it would just be a change to the game, which would make people happy, which would increase player satisfaction and like good feelings towards the game. People would be like, yes, at last, Warlock tank. But it wouldn't have the same excitement as it does a Season of Discovery, because you're just talking about a permanent change as opposed to a transient change. And that's the definition I'm trying, that's the kind of like separation I'm trying to make here. You know? A huge amount of Season of Discoveries and like the joy of a Warlock tank comes from the fact that next Season of Discovery, there won't be Warlock tanks. Next Season of Discovery, there's going to be like warrior healers, right? That'll be the thing, you know, one of the things. So that kind of like temporary nature increases the excitement. Belilar a couple of years ago would have described it as like enforced scarcity and criticized it. But, you know, there is enjoyment to be had from transient things in MMOs, definitely. I don't think they remove runes after each phase. No, they don't. But the Season of Discovery is like, they are time gating the Season of Discovery in terms of you know, rollout. But the entire thing is one thing. So, you know, from 0 to, is it 60 it's going to go up to eventually? Yeah. You know, that's the Season of Discovery, not this one part where you go up to 25. Apologies, I thought you meant SOD. No, don't worry, Yoslo, I wasn't having a go. Sorry if I came across that way. As for Classic players optimizing leveling, I also think since leveling is more important than retail, it's similar to endgame optimization in retail. Yeah, totally, I agree. But the reason I brought it up, and apologies if you weren't here to hear it, was that, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with optimizing leveling, but that is at odds with the idea that Classic in general is much more about the exploration and the discovery. Season of Discovery is now, because it's new, and it won't get a chance to get very old, which is, I think, the most important thing about it. Because if it did get a chance to get old, it would fall into the Classic thing of like having the most efficient path, like literally programmed into your add-ons. But yeah, I feel like that idea that people have about Classic of, oh, it's like the olden days where you're discovering shit for the first time and stuff. I think most people's Classic experience isn't that. You know, because we do know that game inside out. But yeah, and Season of Discovery has got that back again for the time being, and I think that's fantastic. I think that's a really good thing. But the question we're asking here is like, how do we introduce that excitement into retail? Like, how do we do that? What can you do to retail? What lessons, I guess I'm asking, can retail learn from Season of Discovery to make that more exciting? SOD is a lot more fun with a guild. We're doing everything blind. Can't wait for enough of us to reach 25 and do the blind raid. Okay, cool. So that's really interesting, though, because that is a self-imposed limitation that you've put on that. You know? So I agree. Going into raids blind is a lot more fun. Yeah, I always try and do it myself. But, you know, no one's forcing my raid leader to tell people to watch videos and know the fights before we get there. That is a self-imposed restriction, and no one is forcing you in retail or your raid team to make sure you know the fights before you go in, So that's not the game doing anything differently. That's your approach to the game being different. So how do we encourage that approach to the game in retail? You can do every raid in retail blind if you want. So how do we get that sense of players wanting to do that in retail? Class skin secrets for you to find and unlock would be amazing. But again, people just find them and then you'd look up how to do them. Pay more testers and reduce stuff on the PTR. Yeah, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? I agree, that would be really good. Yeah. I agree. The first 2 days of SOD were very exciting, and now it's getting a bit min-maxed. Oh well, that's naturally going to happen, isn't it? Yeah. I don't think retail really needs to change much. Dragonflight had a ton of exploration and discovery. That's actually very true. Yeah. Also, you can look at and I think that's one of the reasons people don't think there's much going on in Dragonflight. I feel like, a lot of people say there's not much to do in Dragonflight, and that's because of the non-mandatory element to so much of the content. They're not used to going in blind. They're not used to just exploring and finding stuff and following little leads and stuff, which is really fun to do in Dragonflight. And I think that's really cool, and has been part of the game since the beginning. But because at the end of it you get a pet or a tabard or a transmog item or something like that, it's so unimportant to the way that a lot of people play retail. And how do you I don't have an answer, by the way, but how do you change people's perception to just enjoy the game? Yeah, the closest and I was saying this so much because I spent a good afternoon on stream finding all the dragon glyphs and PTR on beta for Dragonflight, and I was begging people not to look up where the glyphs were. Begging them. I was like, please, just give yourself 2 or 3 hours. I promise you it will be 2 or 3 hours well spent. It'll be 2 or 3 hours of enjoying a video game, Just don't look them up, man. Go out and find them. You're going to really enjoy it. And I loved it. I loved those 2 or 3 hours that I spent getting the dragon riding glyphs, not knowing where they were. Fucking brilliant. And I've enjoyed it every patch as well. I disagree. Dragonflight world content is a waste of time. If you have good enough gear, you have no reason to do it all. I disagree. I mean, there should be an appreciation for what, content is for. And there is some content there that is absolutely for catch-up gear, right? Which you're probably not going to look. But then you're probably not going to want. But, maybe you're going to want those cool fucking, appearances that you can collect from the infusion camps and stuff like that, and that's what I mean. Yeah, the game isn't just about the gear. That sounds like to me someone who would definitely not go into a raid without learning all the fights first. And I think that's a great thing. I think it's brilliant to go into raids without. Is it because it's easier as well? Let's be real. And again, if you've done Black Fathom Depths, please let me know, because I'm sure it's much harder than the usual classic raid. It's supposed to be, right? But is there this idea that it's just if you're a player and you've got to 25, is there the fact that it's not actually max level being 25? And also this idea that gameplay in Classic is just a bit easier, the button presses are just a bit easier in Classic than they are in retail. It does have a lower skill ceiling generally. Does that make it more likely that you're going to go into Black Fathom Depths blind? No, but my understanding is that Black Fathom Depths, it's a new raid, and it's more like kind of retail difficulty than Classic, is what I've heard. But I might be I might be wrong. I think there's an idea that gear is the only thing that matters. Gear means progressing. Gear is the level. Yeah, but on Season on Discovery, why is it that people are more willing to go into Black Fathom Depths blind than they are? Is it because it feels like a mega dungeon rather than the raid? Maybe. Is it because there's an understanding it'll probably be easier than you'd expect a retail raid to be? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'd love to hear your opinions. I think it's because people buy into of the buy-in people have to the season. So it's literally just a psychological thing. I think you might be right, honestly. Honestly, I think you might be right. I think people are just more willing to do it in Season of Discovery for whatever reason. And I think that's fantastic. And why do you think that is? Again, I think it's the transient nature of it. I think it's the temporary nature of it. You know? I genuinely think that's what it is. I think the most important thing about Season of Discovery is that it's not permanent changes to the game. Like, genuinely. I think that's the... And if retail is to learn a lesson, maybe that's the lesson. I don't know how you would apply that to retail, but maybe people who understand game design better than me can think of a way.